Good afternoon on the East Coast. Good afternoon on the morning on the West Coast, or I might have had reversed that. Apologies. Welcome to the National Transportation Stakeholders Forum, Harborview's Breach CS-137 Source Packaging and Transportation webinar. I'm Mitch Arvidsson with the Council of State Governments Midwest, and I'm managing logistics for today's webinar. Let's start with a few housekeeping announcements. First, this webinar is being recorded and will be available later today on the NTSF website. Today's webinar slides will also be available online. Second, please note that all participant lines have been muted as you enter the webinar, and please keep yourself muted until we take questions when the presentations are over. These icons show the relevant commands in the Zoom control panel. The control panel is set to minimize itself so it won't be in the way, but it will pop back up if you scroll over it with a mouse. Even though you're all muted, we want this webinar to be interactive. If you have a question during the presentations, please let us know by either typing your question in the chat or by clicking on the hand icon to raise your hand. Written questions will be read out loud, and I encourage you to submit them throughout the webinar. If you raise your hand, I'll ask to unmute your line so that you can ask your question. If you accidentally click on the button to raise your hand, just click it again and it'll turn off. A few tips if you do plan to raise your hand to ask a question. If you selected computer audio, you can test your settings by clicking on the arrow pointing up next to the mute button and then selecting test speaker and microphone. Now I'll turn the floor over to Ellen Edge, TEP Program Manager at DOE-EM's Office of Packaging and Transportation, who will introduce today's topic and speakers.
All right, thank you, Mitch. Welcome everybody to today's webinar. As Mitch mentioned, I am Ellen Edge with the Department of Energy Environmental Management Office of Packaging and Transportation, and I am the staff lead for the National Transportation Stakeholders Forum. Today's speakers are Todd Selmer with the Waste Isolation Pilot Plant, Andy Walker with the DOE Carlsbad Field Office, and Bernie White with the U.S. Nuclear Regulatory Commission. Mr. Todd Selmer is the Manager of Packaging Engineering and Information Systems for Simco LLC. Prior to becoming the engineering group manager 16 years ago, he was the cognizant engineer for both the contact handled and remote handled Type B packages. In this capacity, his group is responsible for the design, testing, NRC licensing, operations, and maintenance of the Type B packaging fleet. He has been with Simco LLC for 25 years. Mr. Andy Walker has been with the U.S. Department of Energy Carlsbad Field Office since August 2008, where he is the National TRUE Programs Operation Division Director. His duties include supervision of scope related to loading and transport of transuranic waste to WIP, transportation packaging, external emergency management, transportation route negotiations, waste data stream operation, and the Transcom satellite tracking system. Mr. Bernie White joined the NRC in July 1990 as a nuclear engineer in the CASC certification section in the transportation branch of the Office of Nuclear Material Safety and Safeguards. Bernie held progressively more responsible positions while performing technical reviews of transportation packages and storage casks. In September 2006, Bernie was selected to be the technical assistant to the director of the Spent Fuel Project Office. In August 2012, Mr. White transitioned to his current position, Senior Project Manager in the Division of Fuel Management. Go forward, please, Mitch. Thank you. On today's webinar, Mr. Walker will open and discuss the basic concept of and brief history of the Carlsbad Field Office transportation system. He will also discuss how his office was contacted and the brainstorming sessions they conducted to determine which cask they would seek approval to use. Then Mr. Selmer will explain the application process used to seek NRC authorization and the engineered design for the shielded dunnage assembly created to allow the transport. Mr. White then will describe the NRC's review process for authorization before Mr. Walker closes us out with a description of the actual loading process, as well as the Washington State CVSA inspection and shipment release. But first, a very brief description of the incident at the University of Washington Harborview Medical Center Research and Training Building, which we'll call Harborview to keep it short, located in downtown Seattle. On May 9th, 2019, International Isotopes Incorporated, or INIS, a subcontractor to Triad National Security LLC, attempted to recover a 2,900 curie sealed source from a blood irradiator at Harborview for the NNSA off-site source recovery program. INIS used a high-speed cutoff saw inside their mobile hot cell to ground down the ends of the roll pin, unthread, and then open the source holder. This did not work as planned, however, as the source holder would not unthread. So INIS continued to use the saw to cut into the source holder, believing it to be the threaded portion of the rod. These cuts penetrated the sealed source capsule, releasing a small amount of cesium inside, which led to internal and external contamination of workers and observers and widespread contamination throughout Harborview's research and training building and the local environment. Full decontamination of the building took around 2 years and cost $150 million. We will take questions from the audience during and after the presentation. And now I'd like to turn it over to Andy to go from here.
All right, thank you, Ellen. Yep, appreciate everybody joining us today. I probably know most everybody in the audience, but if not, I'm Andy Walker, Director of Operations Division at CBFO. So go on to the next slide, please, Mitch. Now, this was a pretty interesting task that we got asked to help with here. We kind of at first wondered, all right, how come they come to us? Because the way I understand it, the Secretary of Energy contacted EM1, and EM1 contacted Todd Schrader, which at the time was our field office manager. And Todd came in and asked us, all right, what can we do? What can we do to help these people? So we, just a brief overview of what our capabilities are and why we believe they came to us. So our WHIP transportation program, we've been, transporting true waste to WHIP for a good number of years now. We've got over 13,000 shipments to WHIP. We've got over 16 million loaded miles. Those are loaded shipment miles only. So we track the empties just like we track the loaded. So you can basically double that. We've been about 32 million miles without a major accident, which is, we've been noted, like it says there in that little box, the transportation system is safer than that employed for any other hazardous material on the road. And we believe that, we work hard to keep that safety record, and we think that's part of why they came to us. We do use dedicated carrier contracts. We have one contract, that's Cass Specialty Transportation, and they do an outstanding job for us. So we have the protocols in place, excuse me, we have protocols in place that we agreed to operate with the state regional groups, Western Governors Association, Southern States Energy Board, Council of Midwest States. In those agreements, we have bad weather protocols. So if National Weather Service declares a warning of any kind, well, we will park our trucks. We don't go through bad weather situations. So we also have CVSA level 6 inspections on every single shipment. A point of origin inspection, but typically, as we're coming from the north, Colorado will do another inspection, and then New Mexico does another inspection. So some of our shipments have 3 full CVSA level 6 inspections. So if we do have to get off of the road, we have safe parking protocols where we've already got agreements with the states as to where we'll get into a safe parking situation. So that keeps us off the road, keeps us safe in those conditions. We also have constant communications. The trucks all have mobile phones, Transcom, CB radios. We can communicate with the truck at pretty much any time, and the states have the opportunity to view those trucks on Transcom as they go across their state. So we have good visibility. Next slide, please, Mitch. Like I say, we have dedicated carriers. We do the shipment monitoring remotely with the Transcom. And then we have over 100 shipping packages type B casks. So we've got the True Pack 2, the top left-hand picture there is a True Pack 2 shipment on a trailer. And then the picture on the right is actually 3 half packs. Those are half packs. We ship the shielding containers in the half pack, excuse me. Can't talk today. We recently completed 5 actually shipments from Argonne with those shielded containers in the half pack. So we utilize those for heavyweight shipments as well. So if we have heavier packages, we'll ship typically 2 true packs and a half pack on a trailer so that we can stay under the 80,000 pounds. The bottom left is the True Pack 3. That's the bigger package we utilize to ship standard large boxes out of Savannah River. And then the bottom right is the 72B RH cask, remote handle cask. And that's actually the package that we use to transport this source from Seattle. We also have mobile loading teams. So not just do we transport the waste and monitor it, but we also have teams that go and load the waste at all the true waste sites. Next slide, please. So when Mr. Silmer came to us and asked us, all right, can we help, go get this source transported out? And like Ellen said, it was already, they had gotten it back into the transport pig at that point, but we had to evaluate, okay, what type of source is it? What's the constituents? Had to look at our type B cask and figure out, okay, which one would it fit in even? We had to get the sizes of it and figure out what cask we could fit it into compliantly. And then we had to do the engineered proposal for a dunnage assembly, and that's where Todd will get into it. But then we had to get Mr. White and NRC involved to get approval for that. So it was a pretty lengthy process, and we basically started it that day because we had to get moving on it. So let's go on to the next slide, and I'll turn it over to Todd.
Okay, thank you very much, Andy. So again, I'm Todd Selmer. I've been here at the WIP project starting my 27th year. And it's interesting. Mitch, if you could go to the next slide. That's just a quick presentation of what's going on. Next slide, please, Mitch. So I have a high level timeline here of events, and it's like 3 pages long. I'm not going through all that, trust me. I'm not doing that. It's really there just to show some important dates. So on March 16th is when, as Andy said, Mr. Schrader got a hold of us, said, here's some initial details on the incidents. It's bigger than a bread box. We think it's this, and we think it's over here. On May 20th, then we received additional details on the source, the radioisotope form, associated activity. Looking at those things allowed us to make the decision that the 72B, that is the best, that's going to be the best package for this recovery for us to use. And our initial shielding calcs did reflect additional internal shielding that was needed. On 5/21, you'll see there was a telecon with the NRC, NNSA, CBFO, and the WIP M&O packaging group to discuss the event and the license approach that we felt would be the best way to go at it. And I just can't stress enough how the NRC representatives on that call they're so helpful to make sure we weren't going down an approach that would add time to this process, because we knew the shipping authorization had to happen in a very short amount of time. So that just can't stress how helpful that was, because they would make sure that we were implementing the correct approach. After we had looked at what we were doing, looking at everything that was needed, we decided to go to the one-time shipment authorization approach, because the 72B itself, for that C of C, we met every one of the requirements except my activity limits for cesium. They were going to be crossed over on my limits. So we knew we had to design a shielded dunnage system. So so from 5/16 to 5/21, and then if you'll go down one more slide, please, Mitch. Then, so on 5/30, we completed our internal reviews for the one-time shipping authorization. So we had done shielding calcs, had designed the shielded dunnage assembly for the IS transfer cask, and had completed all of that in just from 5/21 to 5/30. And I will tell you, my team, they went above and beyond. I mean, there was no weekends off. No, everybody was working 12, 14-hour days, because it was interesting. On 5/16, when we first got the call from Mr. Schrader, I went after he filled us in on the information he had. I kind of started laughing, and I, you know, in all the years I've been doing this, I just laughed, and I told Todd Schrader and our president at the time, Mr. Bruce Koverick, that this is the first time in all these years when somebody said this is an emergency, that it was actually an emergency, right? Everything else is, oh, I have a milestone to meet, or I forgot to do this. So their problem becomes an emergency, but it's not really an emergency. This one was the first time it actually was an emergency. And everybody on our team understood it, and it was, I could have been prouder. There was procurements placed, just a lot of groups got involved. Our procurement group, our QA group for witnesses, just really did a great job. Then we went to Harborview. We did a walk down of that facility to try to figure out the logistics. You know, where are we going to put the 72 cask, all the associated loading equipment necessary to implement this. Then again, 6.6 and 6.7 telecons with the NRC to discuss some RSIs for the application. We wanted to make sure we were getting this done, and we're answering those questions explicitly to give the information necessary to Mr. White and his team to complete that expedited review. So from 6.7 to 6.11, we did a finite element analysis model and report on the shielded dunnage assembly under HAC. It was built and ran. The internal review was completed. And on 6.12, the response to the NRC's RSI was submitted. Next page. We did dry runs from 6.18 to 6.20, the mobile loading crews that Andy had talked about earlier. They picked some of their very best guys, sent them to Carlsbad, and we did dry runs on the assemblies, all the equipment, making sure everything was working. You know, we had to pull the cask 11 out of mothballs because we hadn't operated the 72B fleet since 2014 after our incident at WIP. So we had to bring that, get a unit out, get all the maintenance done, make sure the hydraulic rotating cask transport trailer was functioning. So there was a lot of activities happening all at the same time. And then on 6/21, we received our one-time shipment for the operation of the breach Cs-137 source. And what's key is there, again, from our discussion with the NRC on May 21st, to sending the application in on June 12th, 5/31, then the RSIs and everything. I mean, we're talking a little over, not quite 30 days, and this process went through. There was no shortcuts. I don't want anybody to get the idea that there was a shortcut. There was a lot of communication. That was the key to all of this being success. The communication was happening daily. We had talks with the folks in Harborview. We would have discussions with the NRC whenever it was needed. It was just a wonderful, just series of events that was just all keyed with the communication. And then Andy will walk through this, the rest of it for the cast. But we got there. We did our walkthroughs, the MLU trucks. If you could have seen where they had to put these trucks at. These drivers that Andy talked about, the cast drivers, I would have bet $100 you couldn't get a big long trailer and a big semi like that in there, but they certainly proved me wrong. That's for sure. Next slide, Mitch. So our licensing approach was pretty simple. As I said, after we looked at everything, we knew the 72B cast met all the requirements for the shipment except the authorization for Cs-137. we're authorized for it, just not to that limit. As I said, it was 2,900 curies, and that went above my requirements. So we actually did it in 4 parts. We decided to do a crosswalk that would show the document on how this one-time shipping authorization met all of our requirements in the CFC, the SAR, and the RH Tran Pack. So we just did it requirement by requirement. How does it meet it? And this is how we did it. And the same thing with the shielding, right? We knew the 72B, although it has quite a bit amount of shielding, by itself, it was not going to do what was necessary to ship this on the public highway. So we did the shielded dunnage assembly, did that design, did the shielding calc for that, showing what it would be, showing that it was well within the limits of what was required to put this shipment on the road. It was just a lot of, we just knew this approach was going to work. Again, we discussed it with the NRC, Bernie and his team. We knew that this was going to work. So after that was just discussions. Okay, what can we do to make this process speed along their ability to do the full and thorough review that the NRC has to do. And we knew that. We know that. I mean, we do this for a living. It's what we do. So we're aware what their process is. Next slide, Mitch, please. So the preparations, like I said, the 72B cask had been out of service since February 2014. We brought cask number 11 in. We brought in all the required ancillaries for the package operations, brought those into the maintenance subcontractor, had to blow off a lot of procedures, the dust off procedures, because again, like I said, they hadn't done this in 5 years. The rotating cask trailer was brought up and brought in for inspections and the functional testing. All maintenance activities were completed. Everything required in chapter 8, and the dry run and mock-ups were to make sure that we could actually meet all of our requirements delineated in chapter 7 of the SAR for the loading and operations of the cask. Next slide, please. So there's just a quick depiction of the shielded dunnage assembly that you'll see. It's the top and bottom was the main concern. I believe that's 5 inches of lead shielding on top and bottom. And it was, it was a great design by one of our engineers. He just thought of, hey, let's do a clamshell so it can't move. And it worked really, really well. Next slide. So here's a picture of those guys assembling. So you see the INIS transfer cask is set inside and it's being bolted together. We had 2 conditions, right? They described the condition of the INIS transfer cask. And the second condition is that it would be placed inside that shielded dunnage assembly and assembled for the drawing. And we also developed and published a specific O&M manual for the operation of the shielded dunnage assembly. Next slide, please. Thank you. And then here's a figure to show these were loaded in what's called an RLC, removable lid canister. That's the standard internal payload container for a 72B. We have a few different versions, but this is our standard one. And there you'll see the shielded dunnage with the INIS transfer cask on the bottom, and then 2 55-gallon dunnage drums on top of that. That was the configuration we had depicted and analyzed in our shielding analysis submitted. Next slide, please. It was the guys doing this work, the mobile loading team, are just such experts at this. I've done a few myself, but these guys are really very, very good. So the shielded dunnage assembly and the dunnage drums were loaded. The inter-vessel lid was installed, pre-shipment leakage rate testing, the outer cast lid, pre-shipment leakage rate, and testing was performed successfully. And cast number 11 left for PNNL at 8:10 p.m. It was pretty amazing series of events. Next slide. Oh, that's it for me. Thank you all very much.
Thanks. Can I have the next slide, please? So the objective of my talk to kind of give you a sense for what we at the NRC did, what we at the NRC did to expedite the review of this and issue one-time authorization to NWP in just about 3 weeks from time of receipt of the application. So want to give you a sense of kind of how we prioritize our work at the NRC. Generally, most of our casework comes in as item category 4, routine licensing actions. If there's a need date associated with an action, it can be upgraded to a priority 3 or priority 2, depending upon how soon the need date is and what the need date is for. If we get and they say an exemption from a licensee that they need in order to do a loading campaign in the near term future, and that loading campaign would ensure that they have full core offload capability, we would upgrade that to maybe a category 2 item. And so category 2s would trump category 3s, category 3s would trump category 4s in terms of prioritizing of doing our work and getting it issued. This one, given the issues involved, we raised that to a priority 1, an immediate safety issue, critical agency response needed, because we knew that they needed our approval of the package before they could ship it off site and even begin to do decontamination of the site. I've been doing this for over 30 years, and this is, as far as I know, one of the few, if not the only category 1 prioritization that we've had that I'm aware of. Next slide, please. So what is the approach to success at the NRC for this compared to a standard casework? So normally we get an application in, the PM would read it, we would do the licensing piece, get our EPIDs and develop a team who we need, develop a schedule. Given the talk that we had with Todd ahead of time back in I'll call it mid-late May, I think it was the 21st, he said, we did a lot of those things up front. And that was really efficient, because when we got the application on the 31st, the team could start reviewing it right away. We had the team in line, we had all the items they need to be able to charge for it. We had it all set up in Adams. We had everybody ready to do their work. They had a sense for what was going to come in as well. Getting an application cold, you got to read the application, figure it out, see where things lie. You see what the issues are. Here we kind of knew what the issues were. I'll touch on that a little bit later in my talk. Process efficiency. So normally in a normal case, we'd issue a written RAI. Takes time to write it, edit it, get it through concurrence, 2-3 weeks, sometimes just in that. Here we were able to synthesize down our questions in about 10 days, about 10 working days, about 2 weeks. Maybe a little less. We had a call with them to request some clarifying information. That clarifying information is what Todd talked about the finite element analysis. And I'll talk a little bit about why we needed that on a later slide. And then while they were developing that, I was working on the draft letter authorization, just getting the letter authorization done and written up. And I'll call it the front and back end of the SER, kind of what they submitted, why they submitted it, kind of why we're approving it. And then the middle pieces are done by our technical reviewers. Most of the middle pieces were done ahead of time because we didn't have any questions except for the structural part. Assuming the structural part was acceptable, the shielding piece was good as well. And so we were able to start drafting some of this in parallel. Well, normally we'd wait to do our drafting after our technical review is completed. So what do we made sure we focused on safety. Even though we had a tight timeline, we wanted to make sure that safety was job number 1, as they used to say. I think it was at Ford. Why was this package such a good pick for us to do our review and be able to approve it? Well, it's a leak tight package, so we didn't have to worry about containment criteria, as long as what they were proposing to ship, the shielded dunnage container with the pig and then the 2 drums on top, didn't impact the lid in a drop test. They showed that the weight for all of those was bounded by weights we had already approved. The decay heat from the source is bounded by decay heats we'd already approved. So really the only issue for us was looking at shielding and making sure that the shielding came within the dose rates in part 71. Next slide, please. Just wanted to kind of remind everybody. So, we, as Todd said, we maintained safety. We looked at all the package performance requirements, made sure they were still applicable, made sure none of these tests were impacted by what they shipped because the contents were bounded by previous contents by weight. They weren't. Next slide, please. We looked at the package performance criteria. Obviously, no criticality safety in this, so we had to look at dose rates and the containment criteria. Containment criteria wasn't impacted because none of the tests for normal conditions to transport or hypothetical accident conditions were impacted. And so we really were able to focus on the dose rates for normal conditions of transport, and then after the hypothetical accident conditions dose rate. Next slide, please. So Todd's showing you some of these pictures already. The one I have included here that Todd didn't show was the overall RH272B and how they all kind of fit together. So we looked at the overall packaging. We looked at the inner container. I think Todd calls it an RLC. We call it an inner container with drums, and then the shielded dunnage container and how that all acted in concert in the 30-foot drop, the puncture test, the fire test, and came to the conclusion pretty quickly that none of those tests were impacted, again, because weight and decay heat is bounded by previous contents. The one question we did have was on the shielded container. We had done some analysis on our own ahead of time before issuing the request to Todd to see if we could show that the dose rates without the shielded container, meaning if it failed and the source were to get out and be inside the RH272B, and whether or not that could meet the dose rates in Part 71. We found it couldn't. And so we had to rely on the structure of the shielded container shown on the right, which I know Todd's already shown. So we had to rely on the structural analysis, and that's why we asked the structural question to show that the shielded inner container can stay together and hold the lead pig together, keep the source inside in a shielded position. Next slide, please. So some final thoughts. A lot of casework logistics we did prior to receipt of the application. NWTP did a great job in communicating to us what to expect when we got the application in. We could think about it a little bit before we got the application in, and that kind of narrowed down what we were able to look at, or what we needed to look at to do our technical review. There was a lot of steps that we completed in parallel for efficiency that normally we would not necessarily do those in parallel depending upon the priority of the case. And as I said, that the focus of the review was narrowly scoped because we didn't have to worry about containment, we didn't have to worry about decay heat, no criticality safety. So it was really all focused on ensuring that the shielding remained intact and in position. When I say intact, held together and in position to keep that source inside the inner shielded container. So, and that's all I have. I'll turn it back over to Andy. Thanks.
Thank you, Bernie. Yeah, and I think it goes without saying, Todd and Bernie's folks that worked on this were outstanding. I mean, it couldn't have happened in the time frame that it was with those groups' professionalism, and man, we really appreciated that. It was a task that we got called on to help, and it was outstanding, the work that we got on that. A few more things to talk about on this. That some of the things that I'll bring up, just kind of interesting things. You always get into, unknowns when you do this stuff. So the first thing we had to do is the logistic concerns. Like Todd mentioned, this is not an area that semi trucks typically are going to be driving in. So the roads getting into this place are pretty small. And then the interstate coming into Seattle, we had to get with the carrier and figure out, all right, we can't bring the trucks in all at once. Where are we going to park them? So we found a truck stop, I believe it's like 20 some odd miles outside of Seattle, and we staged the trucks there, and we would call them in as we needed them to unload equipment and then bring the cask in. The last thing that we brought in was the cask. Now, the picture down there on the bottom right, that the building on the left side of that picture, that's actually a historical registered old fire station. It was a fire station that at one time had horse-drawn wagons that were fire engines that had horses drawn. So as we were trying to get all this equipment into this little area that's where that trailer's sitting, the guys at the hospital told us, you guys can hit any building around here, but do not hit the one right there that's the historical registered fire station. So like Todd said, those drivers really, showed their professionalism. they would come in there with those trucks and just basically have to jackknife them to get them anywhere near getting a straight shot into that little alleyway, basically, that we're in there. Now, we have some of the best drivers in the world, but they would team up. There would be guys on the outside with headsets on, talking to the driver and getting him through every inch of it, getting him back in there. So it was outstanding just getting the trucks in there and getting them unloaded. It was I was very proud to watch it and very proud to be a part of it. Accounting for the unknown. Todd was very kind. He didn't bring this up. I actually have a picture of when we finally got the pig. They brought the pig out for us to start putting our shielded dunnage assembly on it. And I do have a picture of it. Todd's down there measuring the device because, like Todd and Bernie discussed, we had this approved shielding dunnage assembly built, and the lead at the end of it was machined to fit exactly the drawing that they sent us. So it didn't want to fit. So Todd's down there measuring it, and the plate was supposed to be like a 3x5, and it was about a 3.5x6. So, so of course the INS guys, their conclusion was, well, go change your dunnage. And we're not changing the NRC approved dunnage assembly. You're going to go fix that plate. So we had to help them, and it was just a shielded plug plate. So they were able to take that plate off and put it back on, but there was some pretty good concern there because, we needed to get that thing loaded and get out of there that day. So that was something that we had to work around. But anytime you're on a job like this, you're going to have something, that's not going to go correctly, but it's the professionalism of the people to work around issues like that and still get the problem resolved. So that was one interesting thing we had to work on. Like I said, the area constraints, we had our carrier terminal manager fly up there. I know Todd went up and walked the area down. We had to have him, there's like the street getting in there, there's a skywalk that goes across that. And the people there couldn't tell us exactly the height of it, which was kind of strange to us. But so we had our carrier manager actually fly out there and walk all that area down, do some measurements to find out what's going to be the best route to get the trucks in there, to give them the best shot of trying to get back into this. It's a very small street that you had to come into. And the night of the event, we weren't there, of course, but when they had the actual breach, the Seattle Fire Department had responded with a huge ladder truck, and so these firefighters, they were real interested in what was going on as far as the cleanup. So we had the area closed off for cars, but the fire truck, they would show up and park their ladder truck right there on the street and get out and watch for a while. And we'd have to ask them, hey, you're going to have to move the fire truck because we got to move some more equipment in and out. So that was pretty entertaining. They're great guys. They offered to help us, when we got ready to leave. We needed an escort, and they offered, well, we'll get out there with a ladder truck and shut the interstate down. Or no, that's not the kind of attention that we really want. But they were more than willing to help if we'd asked them to. CBFO-based personnel, we brought a lot of resources to bear on this. When we went out there, I went out there as the CBFO lead. Our mobile loading unit team, I think we had 5 guys out there. Wade Wireman was kind of the lead for that effort. Packaging, of course, Todd, he's our expert with packaging. He was there. Public affairs, we had people there, of course. The area was roped off, but there was still a lot of attention. There was actually a helicopter flying overhead for the local news channel that filmed us as we were loading that. We brought our own transportation engineer out to do the manifesting, and then, of course, the carrier driver teams to transport all of it. So next slide, please. Here's some pictures, and I actually got these approved through headquarters. I wasn't sure if I was going to be able to, but so that's actually the RLC on that right-hand picture that's being picked out of that storage stand. That's a stand that we set the RLC into to load the drones and the pig into it. So The one on the left is actually the RLC coming out of the stand, and then the right's just a picture of that stand. Next slide, please. So here's after the RLC is put inside of the 72B. The farthest one on the left is actually the 72B cask, which is uprighted on the trailer, and the impact limiters are off of it. So that picture, I believe we're actually putting the lid back on the 72B cask there. And then the next picture is the cask starting to rotate back down to the horizontal position. And then the furthest on the right is actually where we're putting the impact limiters back on the two ends of the 72B. So as you can tell, we've got a lot of equipment in a really small area there. We had the truck with the 72B, and then we had 2 full trailers of the MLU equipment just for all of the stuff that we had to have to do this task. Next slide, please. I think that's all I've got.
Thank you very much, Andy and Bernie and Todd, for your wonderful presentations. We'll now open up the floor for questions. Attendees, please either raise your hands and I will unmute your line, or put a question in the chat, and we'll ask our presenters there. Elizabeth Helvey asks, how is the media coverage on the transportation?
I can take that one, Mitch. We had some on-scene reporters. We had actually headquarters and our own CBFO public affairs folks there. So they did several interviews with the local media. And like I say, I think maybe back at the office, I may still have a copy of it, but the News 7 helicopter was actually overhead filming us as we were doing that loading evolution, putting RLC into the 72B cask. But I mean, they gave us a pretty fair shake. You know, we were there to help get the part of the solution. Of course, they have to do the decon after we got the cask out of there, or the pig, but I think they were pretty fair to us when we were there, but it was fairly extensive coverage.
So thank you for that answer. Another question we have is, will there be any future use or any planned future use of a 72B to recover Cs-137 blood irradiator?
I hope not.
Yeah,
there are more efficient ways.
Right. Yeah, and one of the things that came as a result of our participation in this actual source recovery is, you know, I guess like Ellen said at the beginning, Triad is the LANL contractor. So this International Isotopes was actually a subcontractor for Triad. Well, at the time, our mobile loaders worked through LANL Carlsbad. We had a work authorization, and it was a Carlsbad resource, but they were technically Triad employees. So it's kind of interesting that when we got there, and some of the NTSF folks, you know, they were impressed with the operation of the team, and they were like, hey, we didn't know we had that resource. And I'm like, well, you technically don't have that resource as a Carlsbad resource. But happily, you know, this was kind of a mess the way it happened. And NSA went and patterned they have a source recovery team now that's patterned after our mobile loading unit team. So Todd can tell you what, I can't remember the number of the cask. They went and developed themselves a cask, and they have a mobile loading unit teams, and they actually copied, you know, to the extent that they could, all of our mobile loading unit procedures. So they do have a much better team in place now to deal with these type of source recoveries.
Yeah, that's right. They're actually utilizing the 435B and the 380B to do these source recoveries now. Yeah, and they've asked us to review their program, and I have on a few occasions. And you're right. You know, I guess they figured, Andy, why reinvent the wheel, right? You know, they pretty much implemented most of our processes and procedures out of Carlsbad.
Yeah, thank you for that answer. Another question, did ORS ask EM to assist?
It came actually from Secretary of Energy down to EM1 to Todd Schrader. So I'm not sure. That was the path that I knew how it got to us.
And I'm not really sure, and it's not laid out in the question. What is ORS? Maybe for the other members of the audience who don't know.
Yeah, ORS, I'm not familiar with that one either. I thought it might be Office of, well, it's not Secure Transit, so I'm not sure what ORS is.
Maybe Young Lou could clarify in the chat. But I have a question myself, and that is, once the package was loaded and left Seattle on its way to WIP, how was the interactions and communications with states and communities along the transportation route? Was it much similar to traditional WIP shipments, or was there a bit more outreach ahead of time? Any kind of inspections at border crossings or escorts?
No, this transferred to PNNL, only 4 hours away.
Okay.
That's where it went to. One-time shipment to PNNL.
Yeah, absolutely. And Mitch, we did have pretty extensive conversations with Washington. Jacob Hersey from Washington assisted us with getting inspectors lined up. And, this wasn't a true waste shipment, and it wasn't HRCQ. So we followed DOT compliance, to label it and things. And it actually, because of those two things, it didn't require a level 6 inspection, but we offered to Washington, hey, we're ready. If you want to do a level 6 inspection on it, we're more than happy for you to do so. But they did the inspection, and like Todd said, we departed about 8:10 at night. It was interesting logistics on that one too, because the streets turning out of there are not meant for semi trucks. So poor Bobby St. John, our public affairs guy, I stood him on a corner, and I was leading the truck out in my rental vehicle. I told him, when the light turns yellow, I need you to step out there and stop traffic that's trying to pull up to the red light, because we need that extra turning radius to get to the next lane, So Bobby's a trooper. He stepped out there, and he got a few screeching horns at him and maybe a few hand gestures, but he got traffic stopped where we could make the corner with the truck. But we made it to PNNL, like Todd said, about 4 hours, a little after midnight. I got them out of town and then followed them all the way over there, and then picked up the drivers and took them to a hotel that night. So.
All hands on deck. Have the public affairs officer involved in the operation. I love that.
Absolutely.
All right, folks. Still got a few minutes here. If there's any last minute questions, pop them in the chat or raise your hands. It's not every day we have a webinar about an actual incident and response, so take advantage of this while you can.
Mitch, I have a question if I could hop in.
Please do.
This is Melanie Snyder. So something that you all highlighted in your presentation was the need for speed, and that seemed to be related to the need to get the source out of the hospital so that decontamination efforts could start. So how was it being contained before you were able to move it? Was it in the mobile hot cell?
No, it wasn't. It was in the lead pig, but it had lead blankets, lead bricks. They kind of just built a little cocoon around it. And they were constantly had a cam there doing constant monitoring for the dose rate readings. But then it had lead blankets, lead bricks just built all the way around it.
So it was contained, but still needed to be removed.
That is correct.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, that's right, Melanie. I don't believe they wanted to start the decon of the building until they had the source out. So like Todd said, on Todd's direction, we had several calls with them, daily, and Todd had basically told me, you're going to have to paint it. So they did paint it to adhere any surface contamination on the pig itself. So we were happy when it came out. We met our readings, and then we got it to PNNL. When we unloaded it, we actually didn't have any contamination inside the RLC even, so that it all worked out really well.
Excellent.
Young, yeah, I believe you're unmuted if you want to ask your question. Or now you, okay. You're there?
Can you hear me? Can everybody hear me?
Yes, now we can.
Okay, I'll turn my video on as well. I read the joint investigation report after the the Harborview, incident, and so for the last few years, been working with, I think ORS stands for Office of Source Recovery Program, and they are NA 211. There's I don't know how many Cs-137 blood irradiators are out there in the hospital. When they approach their end of life, they need to be recovered, right? Retrieved. Very similar to the Harborview case. And the reason I ask, it seems like it's a wonderful use of RB 72. And I want to thank you. I think it's a fascinating stories that the whip got called upon to help. And then of course Bernie White mentioned that this is a true emergency case, how NRC got called into and did amendment, I guess a one-time request in such a short order. But I think the issue or the problems, similar problems, lies ahead. So unless one can find a type B, package to recover these disused Cs-137 blood irradiators, I think that remains to be addressed. And I would doubt that, again, I asked the experts here, the WIP experts, do you think that they can use 435B to do the job?
The 435B would do the job because it has so many internal different configurations that can be used. But you also have the 380B. The 380B has 6¼ inches of lead shielding and is licensed for up to 15,000 curies of cobalt-60. So I think it could. They've implemented that in the field. I believe right now they've done about 20 recoveries with the 380B across the United States.
Well, Bernie didn't say anything. So why not using 433B since they got the NRC cert? And the same thing with 380B. Why
Yeah, I mean,
we come to it?
I mean, we don't control who uses those packages. We just do the package approvals.
All right.
Yeah, and like we kind of discussed that, after this happened is when they kind of developed their own mobile loading unit team and which package was it that they developed, Todd, that they're using now?
The 435B and the 380B both. Those are both NNSA packages that were approved by the NRC.
Yeah, so we're not involved in that, but we suspect, whenever they have a source, they just look at those two packages and they have the availability of those two packages. So they just pick which one's going to work best for whatever they're transporting.
Oh, you guys, I think, come up with a marvelous design. I was amazed by using a existing RB72B, but came up with the idea of what do you call it, RLC? Put two drums on top of the shielding assembly. And I think these two drums on top, are they empty, or you use that basically as a dunnage, right, to keep the bottom line. actually fill up the cavity. So I can see, from the shielding, from a structural point of view, why you do the fine element and all that stuff. So it's a quite I would say ingenious solution. Maybe you should consider, applying for an NRC not just one time, but many times. That's
Well, we
our
kind of hope
alternative.
it's not, yeah, we really hope there's not another situation with this big of an emergency that they have to call on us.
Well, that gives you something else to do, deviate from the routine.
Yeah, we're pretty full time at WIP. We're ramping shipments back up, but whenever we're called upon to help, we definitely try to help. So
There you go. Well, thank you.
Thank
for
you
the
so
question.
much. I really enjoy your presentation, the great WIP team.
Yeah.
Appreciate
Thank you
it.
for the question, Young, and thank you for the responses, Andy and Bernie and Todd. One more question we have, going back to the decontamination of the room and building. Do any of you know how that process happened once the source was removed?
I do not know. I don't.
no, I don't know exactly what all process they use. I did read an article that I think came out about 2020 sometime. It took them a little over 2 years, from what I understand, to decontaminate that building.
Wow. It's a long time.
Mhm.
All right, we're getting close to the top of the hour. Just want to give it another minute for any last second questions from anybody. Going once, going twice. All right. I will turn things over to Ellen for some closing comments. Ellen?
All right, thank you, Mitch. And thank you, Andy, Bernie, and Todd for speaking to us today. And thanks also to Melanie Snyder of the Western Interstate Energy Board for organizing this webinar. Before we end today, I would like to highlight some upcoming activities of the National Transportation Stakeholders Forum that you might be interested in. On the week of May 8th, there will be an NTSF Newcomers Orientation webinar for all those who are new to the NTSF or who would like a refresher. And then the 2023 annual meeting of the NTSF will be taking place in St. Louis, Missouri on May 22nd through the 25th. And information on these webinars and the annual meeting can be found on the NTSF website, which is www.ntsf.info. Thank you all.
And one correction, we do have a date and time for that newcomers orientation. That'll be on Tuesday, May 9th at 1 p.m. And keep an eye out for the registration information to be sent to the distribution list.
All right, thank you, Mitch.
In closing, I think we want to just thank Todd, Andy, and Bernie one more time. Melanie for coordinating, David Strack for his assistance at the NRC, and for all of you participating in today's webinar. As mentioned before, a recording of this webinar and the slides will be posted to the webinars page by the end of this week, probably by the end of today. And this concludes today's webinar. And thank you, everyone, and have a great rest of your week.
Thank you, Mitch.
Have a good day.